This podcast, Depraved Heart Murder, The Tupelo Presleys, is a creation of Southern Fried Chicky Productions, LLC, and was produced in Sun Bear Studio in Ripley, Mississippi. The material presented in this podcast is for general information purposes only. The views and opinions expressed in the podcast interviews do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Southern Fried Chicky Productions, LLC, or Sun Bear Studio, LLC.
Hey y'all, this is Christy McBrayer. I'm the principal member of Southern Fried Chicky Productions, LLC, and your podcast host. This podcast represents the culmination of my 20-year obsession with this fascinating story that occurred in my Mississippi hometown. I hope you enjoy Depraved Heart Murder, The Tupelo Presleys. The story you are about to hear took place in Tupelo, Mississippi from 2001 to 2003, but the roots go way back to the Great Depression. East Tupelo was the wrong side of the tracks, the poor people, people who lived in shanties and barely made ends meet. And there were the Presleys and their kinfolks in every other house in East Tupelo. They were poor and they were rough like everyone else, but they were also a well-known and well-thought-of family in East Tupelo. Then Vernon's boy, Elvis, became the king of rock and roll and wealthy beyond imagination, and then everything changed. Anyone with the last name Presley had instant prestige and mystique. Harold Ray Presley's father, Noah Presley, and Elvis's grandfather, Jesse, were brothers. Harold Ray was born when Elvis was 13 years old. Fast forward to the 80s. Harold Ray Presley and his older brother Arnold had grown up as hard-drinking hellraisers in East Tupelo. Arnold was shot dead when his son Brandon was only 8 years old. Brandon is currently running for governor of the state of Mississippi on the Democratic ticket. Harold Ray turned his life around 3 years later, becoming a Lee County narcotics officer at age 40 and adoptive father to Brandon, who followed him into politics. In an amazingly short period of time, Harold Ray Presley was the sheriff, leaping over heads of career lawmen. He went on a tough on-drugs campaign, and he won the Buford Pusser Award and the admiration of many in Lee County and across the state. And like all larger-than-life characters, he was revered by many, and he was despised by some. And then one night in July of 2001, after an hours-long manhunt, he was shot to death in an outbuilding of a retired Tupelo policeman on a dark and deserted road. He was shot by a man from neighboring Baldwin, Mississippi, Billy Ray Stone, who had kidnapped a woman named Charlene Wright, who was a known sheriff's informant. At the end of the night, Billy Ray, Charlene Wright, and Harold Ray were all dead, and 5 deputies were on administrative leave. My daddy always used the expression, never let the facts get in the way of a good story. But this story needs no exaggeration. There are so many unanswered questions that have led to wild speculation, conflicting news stories, and conspiracy theories. I should take a moment to say that I am not an investigative reporter. I'm an entertainer and a writer by profession. I don't claim to have all the answers, because I do not. My 7 years of research have made this story even more murky and strange, I must admit. I also want to say here that the interviews and statements expressed in this podcast are no reflection of judgment or opinion of myself or the production team. We simply feel that this story deserves to be told to the world. The episodes of this podcast are filled with interviews that I conducted over the years in different areas of Tupelo, Mississippi, with people who were kind enough to participate. I reached out to several of the players who either did not return my calls or chose to opt out. To make it as convenient as possible for those who graciously did take part, I met them at their offices, parks, bars, restaurants, even prison. So there might be some times that there's some ambient noises in the background of chatter, glasses clinking, jukeboxes playing, or birds chirping. With that in mind, there might be some instances to adjust the volume to your auditory preference. Here's a chat that I had with Roy Turner, the executive director of the Elvis Presley birthplace and East Tupelo native. This interview appropriately took place at the birthplace of Elvis Presley in Tupelo. Mr. Turner, I think most Elvis fans are familiar and have heard that Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, spent some time in the penitentiary. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
In doing research, I found a letter where Orville Bean, Vernon's employer, actually had written a letter to the governor on behalf of Vernon asking that he be pardoned. And in the letter, he explains that he sold a hog, that Vernon sold him a hog. And Gladys's brother and Lether Gable, a friend of theirs, convinced Vernon to let them take the check and copy the signature onto several blank checks. And they paid Vernon $15 to do this. So he was prosecuted because he participated in the forgery. But at least we finally get that story straight. And they were all sentenced to parchment. Of course, Vernon was sentenced for 13 months. Gladys tirelessly got petitions signed, 3 in this neighborhood. She got letters from anybody of the teeniest bit of importance to write letters on his behalf. And after 9 months, he was pardoned.
Did you know Elvis when you were young?
No, but I grew up always hearing about him. You know, when you went to the same school and heard the stories, he was always a part of the community story. So I guess everybody felt close to him, even though they never had seen him or didn't know him. I'm going to pretty well say no kid in East Tupelo was necessarily treated well by a lot of people in Tupelo. Because, as I said, this was the wrong side of the tracks, the poor side of town. And I can even recall when Elvis died, one of the major newscasters made the comment he was white trash that did well. All those years later.
Said that term?
Yeah, and a lot of people in Tupelo, years after he passed, still considered him just white trash that got lucky. And I say that because I heard their remarks.
After seeing the Elvis movie, it really showed a little bit more of Gladys having a bit of a drinking problem.
She did.
In the latest movie. And Elvis was very much against alcohol. I've been told that. I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't know that he was against alcohol. He was against Gladys drinking alcohol. But Gladys was known to have a beer. And then later, in Memphis are the first accounts I ever heard of her really having a drinking problem. She was ill, so she too may have been self-medicating. When Elvis was on the road, we all know she worried terribly about him. But in those days he was on the road before he was known all over, according to Gladys's sister, Elvis would come back in from the road and find where Vernon had brought vodka in for Gladys and would hide it from Elvis. Elvis would find it, pour it out, and as soon as he went back out on the road, Vernon would bring more back in. Now, Sister Lillian said he liked to keep her pretty tipsy so he could chase women. I'm just repeating what I was told. I don't know if that's true or not. She was pretty adamant about it, that she knew what she was talking about.
So you said you went to high school with Harold Ray. He was
junior high. I was in junior high. I don't know that he was still at Lawhorn. Lawhorn only went to the 9th grade at that time. He may have already been at the high school. I just remember he and Charlene were together. I think at that time that I was in junior high, Harold Ray was working sacking groceries at Palmer's Big Star, and she was working there also.
So today we have here with us live in the studio Mrs. Charlene Presley, who is the matriarch of the Tupelo Presleys that we are doing this podcast about. Mrs. Presley is the widow of the slain sheriff of Lee County, Harold Ray Presley, and she is also the mother of 3 central characters in this as well, Jada Presley, Brad Presley, and of course, Patrick Presley. Charlene, I know you had many people approach you because this is such an interesting and riveting story, and you said no to many people. What was it about me that you allowed me to tell this story and do this podcast?
I guess because I knew who your daddy was. That was a big thing. And I knew your daddy loved Harold Ray or thought a lot of him. I just felt right about it. When you look at somebody and you're talking about a subject, especially a dead member of your family, you know whether you trust them or not.
You had a lot of people approach you over the years before I was able to talk to you about it, didn't you? And
Yes.
You said no.
Yes. I just didn't like their approach, I guess.
Well, I am so glad and honored that you trusted me to tell your story, Charlene. So now tell us, How did you meet your husband, Harold Ray Presley?
My grandmother lived on the back street behind Palmer's Big Star. I saw Harold at the A&W, which is on South Gloucester Street, where everybody used to ride in a circle around through there, and he was just the love of my life. I was 16 the first time I met him. We married when I was 18. We knew back then everybody was getting their call to go to the Army. That invitation had come in the mail. Everybody was getting it. Uncle Sam wants you, whatever. We knew it was coming because Vietnam was pumping it up, pumping it up. So we knew it was coming. We went ahead and got married in case something happened to him. You know, he said, I want to be able to know that I could take care of you after we got married. So it was a bittersweet thing because I could work and draw a check too and help his parents. They lived in a real old house behind Palmer's. My grandmother lived on the back street behind Palmer's. I had seen Harold in the store before I saw him at the A&W, but I didn't really know who he was in the store, and I kind of figured it all out. But my grandmother thought the world of Harold's daddy. He owned a store in East Tupelo. He was the mayor and the town marshal. She said during the Depression, everybody got stamps, but Mr. Noah made sure everybody in East Tupelo had food. He took the stamps, and the ones that the rich people got no more than the other people. Everybody got the same. And she said nobody did without. He put the water tank tower that's got Elvis on it now. He put that up there. That was his best works as the mayor of East Tupelo. Back then, East Tupelo was incorporated on its own. It was not part of Tupelo. It was always considered the poor side of town, the other side of the tracks. But my grandmother was an elder in the Baptist church there. My grandfather, they built the first building there. My daddy, his brothers, all of them. My uncle is a preacher. He lives at Oxford. He owns B's Antiques. He's an ordained minister. He was part of the whole crew that built the first building there. Harold Ray's daddy, on the other hand, was the elder of St. Mark Church. So my family went as far back as the Presley family in East Tupelo. There's a Mercer Street in the housing project named after my uncle, Mercer McMullen. That was my daddy's uncle. I guess growing up in Memphis, I always thought Elvis was the grandest thing there ever was. Got to go by there all the time, take my little brothers to the theater down there, and when I'd go by, if I saw that Elvis was home, I stopped. And sometimes I never even went back home before I went and got my little brothers because Elvis would be home and he would come down to the gate and talk to us and everything. And all of them that was at the gate. But I mean, I just was crazy about Elvis. So, of course, meeting Presley from East Tupelo. But my parents and my mother and daddy were married in East Heights Baptist Church. They grew up there, too. They were Elvis's age. My mother and daddy were crazy about Elvis. Everywhere he played in Memphis, we went. Seeing Elvis and then seeing a young man from Tupelo that was kin to him, of course, I just never backed up. Elvis's daddy, Vernon, always came to Mr. Noah's house. I will never forget, in 1968, Vernon came. It was the year before Mr. Noah died, and he had a check, and he signed it, and he wrote it out to Mr. Presley, and he told him. He said, now, Uncle Noah, you took my family in when my daddy left us here abandoned in East Tupelo, and you took care of us, and I want to give you some money. And Mr. Noah had no earthly idea what kind of money they were worth. But he refused to take that check. He said, I am not taking your money because I've already been told how the Smiths and all your families up there, and you going to have a big job to take care of all them because I've already done that myself here in East Tupelo. every other house had a Presley in it at one time. My grandmother said that was true. She said back then every house had 2 families in it, but you can bet there's a Presley in one of them. That was how I met him because my family was from East Tupelo.
Okay.
Although I grew up in Memphis where Elvis was. Hellway and I both worked at Palmer's Big Star. My mother stayed on me. She was a nurse. She said, look, my mother and daddy both, I know y'all love that store, but y'all need to be thinking about retirement. You don't have good insurance. You have to pay your own insurance. You got to have a retirement. You're going to have to go with somewhere where they're going to take out a retirement. In 88, me and him both quit the store. We had worked at Mantachi at the Little Star, but he sold it after we did all the work, cleaning it up, fixing it, getting all the stock replenished. He sold the store, so me and Howard never went back to Palmer's. I've been there 18 years. Howard been there 25. He started when he was 14. He went to the sheriff's office. I went to a factory and worked 2 years. It took me that long to get on at the hospital, but I had an education in office occupations, and my mother said, you got a good enough education, you can get a better job than this. I know you love the store, you love getting to see people, but you got to have retirement. So I went to the hospital, and Haraway went to the sheriff's office. But it was mainly for benefits, insurance, and retirement. He was a narcotics officer to begin with, and he did a great job. But he had a lot of jealous people mad because they didn't think he should be making the kind of money he was making when they'd been officers all their life. And Haraway was 40 when he went to the academy, and it was not no easy feat for him either. He had to do some hustling to get through that academy. But he made it, and he did it fine. So after he got back from the academy, he told me one day, he said, I'm going to run for sheriff.
And he won the first time.
Yes. And he drove the church bus for all the little kids in East Tupelo that parents didn't take them to church. We made sure they had clothes to wear. We made sure they had everything they needed. We did the pancake breakfast every year at the school, and that was to put money where the poor kids that didn't have enough money for clothes to start to school and fees to be paid. That's what we did that for. Back then, if you watch the movie about Elvis, Haraway and his brothers were treated awful. They went to Lawhorn School. Aaron Morgan liked to beat Brandon's daddy up with a piece of rolled up newspaper because he wanted to pantomime an Elvis record in the talent show. Haraway said that, they not only went to school with Aaron Morgan, he went to church with them. And he said if you mentioned Elvis or did a jig or said a song, even just said the words to the song, not singing it, he said they'd thump your ears, they'd do everything, pull your hair. Back then, they thought Elvis was terrible. They just thought he was awful. And he said it was not no easy thing. And matter of fact, it never got easy. Because what turned from him being vulgar turned to people being so jealous. That was sad. And see, I grew up in Memphis, and I was seeing how they were treating him. I saw how they really just brutally tried to do everything to keep him from being what he came to be. And he was such a sweet person. Haraway's daddy reminded me of Elvis so much because he raised 17 children. His first wife had 3 children before he married her. They had 6. She died as a young woman. He married Haraway's mother that had 2 children. They had 6. He raised 17 children, and he loved every 17 of them. He treated them all the same. They were just his kids. And he was just the sweetest, kindest person. I just thought, Elvis got it honest. All these Presleys are like that. They're just sweet people. They're nice. They're just kind. Haraway's daddy drove a school bus. A lot of people don't know this, but Elvis and Gladys often went on that school bus with him on Sundays. He took a lot of black families on the school bus to church gatherings, and they would have dinner on the grounds and stay all afternoon. And of course, it was music. It was beautiful. Haraway said they loved it. He drove he drove the school bus, but he drove it every Sunday to these black singings.
Now, Charlene, I know that you feel that your family has been mistreated by many. and you feel that people were jealous of the Presleys, of your husband, Sheriff Harold Ray Presley, your children, Brad, Jada, and most especially Patrick. So I guess my question is, what do you hope that the listeners will take away from this podcast?
To have some compassion for them, some kind of understanding. God stepped right up and let me know that no matter what, he was in control. He was going to see to it that anything that needed justification, he would justify. I don't have any bad feelings toward these people. I really feel sorry for some of them. Some of them lost their jobs. Some of them are now in the pen. Everybody that mistreated us, they got their pay. They got their due one way or the other. And it was in my lifetime where I could see it happen. Jealousy is an evil thing. It's one of the 7 deadliest sins in the world. But if you wait long enough, you can see God level the playing field. And we did. We watched it.
I met Ricky Payne at his wife Holly's flower shop in Nettleton, Mississippi. He was such a delightful man who unequivocally adored Sheriff Harold Ray Presley. He credits Harold Ray for giving him his first break in law enforcement. He is such a sincere man that I truly felt and saw in his eyes the adoration of Sheriff Presley. How long after these events did you go to Monroe County and decide to leave Lee County?
Okay. Sheriff Larry Presley won the election in a special election. I stayed with him. Then when the election come up again, Sheriff Jim Johnson, which is the current sheriff, run against Mr. Larry Presley and beat him to win sheriff. I worked with Mr. Johnson 4 years after that. I resigned, and after that I become chief here in Nettleton, my hometown, for approximately 3 years. Sheriff Cecil Cantrell run for sheriff during that time and got sheriff. I just went to work with him, been with Sheriff Cantrell ever since.
You have stayed close to the Presley family. You and Charlene and the entire family have remained friends. How did you feel about Harold Ray, and what are your feelings about the way that the Presleys have been treated and what they've been through since then?
As far as the way I felt about Harold Ray was like a second father to me. If it hadn't been for Harold Ray, I would never have the opportunity in law enforcement. I'd never been in law enforcement before. I stopped and seen Sheriff Presley one day and asked him for a job. He told me he didn't have anything at that time, and if he had anything open, he would call. He didn't ask me to fill out no resume and no nothing. When I left, I said, well, that's not going to go very good, you know. But 2 weeks later, Sheriff Presley called me out of the blue. He never asked me for my phone number. Now, how he got it, I don't know, but he called me and asked me if I wanted a job, and I said, yes, sir. So he hired me. That was, I think, in May of 1996.
How did you feel when he won the Buford Pusser Award? How did you feel about that?
I thought it was well deserved. He was a good sheriff. One thing about Sheriff Presley, he did not tolerate drugs, period. That was his number one thing, was getting drugs off the street.
Subsequently, after his passing, you decided to purchase the actual Buford Pusser Award that he won from Mrs. Presley.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me a little bit about why you did that?
Well, as I remember, that's been several years ago, to help Miss Charlene out with a little financial aid for her family or her grandchildren.
Sheriff Harold Ray Presley actually won the Buford Pusser Award. Now, for those of you who don't know who Buford Pusser is, he is one of the most renowned historical characters of a Southern sheriff of all time. And if you've ever heard of the Walking Tall movies, well, they were based upon Sheriff Pusser's life. Now, many people have compared Sheriff Harold Ray Presley to Sheriff Pusser, including his nephew, Brandon Presley, who in 2023 ran a formidable campaign for governor of the great state of Mississippi. He actually honored his uncle Harold Ray in campaign commercials and debates by holding Sheriff Presley's badge to emphasize his platform for expanding funds for law enforcement officers. He did, however, lose the election by a narrow margin. Here are a couple of words from Ronnie Burrows, one of Sheriff Harold Ray Presley's deputies. What would you have to say about having worked with and being friends with or associated with Harold Ray Presley? Whatever you have to say about
Harold Ray was probably one of the best bosses I ever worked for. If you needed a friend at that particular moment, that's what he was. If you need, he was the boss when he needed to be. You know, when he needed to deal with an issue. But at any given time, he was there for any of his employees. At any given time, you know, you could call him and he said, "What you need?" As a friend, or as a coworker, as a boss, or whatever, you know. That was just her way. You know, he loved his job and he loved his employees, and actually he loved his inmates.
Interesting.
He told us point blank. He said, "You will not mistreat them. They're human beings, and they just happen to make mistakes."
I had the pleasure of having lunch at a Mexican restaurant outside of Tupelo with longtime administrative assistants to Sheriff Harold Ray Presley and best friends to each other, Kathy Jackson and Janet Burrows.
I just loved him to death. He was just a really great guy. Everybody that, worked with him liked him a lot. I mean, he was always he was family to everybody. He treated us like family. Every day he'd come by and he'd cut up with us and try to make us laugh and aggravate us a little bit every now and then, but he was the best.
Now, I read somewhere that he used to play Jailhouse Rock.
All the time. If you worked there, you got tired of hearing it. You get where you just kind of roll your eyes. Harold Ray's in the building.
I knew Harold Ray several years before I began to work for him. As a matter of fact, he knew me when I was a baby, and so he would come by every morning and get aspirin and a Coke, Anacin and Coke. Every morning, that was his ritual. I considered him one of my best friends. He was the type of person that if he wanted to go to town and look and shop, he'd say, "Come on, Janet and Kathy, let's go to town." And we'd get in the truck and we'd go and shop and, come on, let's
go out and eat.
Let's go out and eat.
He'd take us out to eat.
Yeah.
There'd be 10 of us go out and eat. He'd insist on paying for everybody's dinner.
And, I respected him as a boss, but I didn't think of him as a boss.
No.
I know there were a lot of rumors after he died about him being a dirty cop and taking this and that.
I don't believe any of that.
And I'll never believe that, because we know, Kathy and I know firsthand that he hated drugs.
Absolutely.
He hated them enough that he would put his own children in jail.
Both the sons he put in jail.
Were y'all working for him and
Yeah. And Jada too.
Yeah, Jada too.
So he put 3 of his kids in jail.
Yeah. Well, now, I don't know if Ronnie told you, but he picked up, Brad was drinking one night and Ronnie had stopped, and Ronnie had called Charlene, and Charlene came to get him, and Harold Ray got all over Ronnie. He said, "If you want your job, you better bring him to jail next time." I mean, that's how adamant he was about drinking and drugs. He hated it with a passion. And I would never, ever believe that he would take any type of payoff.
Here's an interview with current Sheriff Jim Johnson that actually took place in former Sheriff Harold Ray Presley's office.
I got involved with the Verona Fire Department, the little town south of Tupelo, and it was combined with the police department. And so that was the first connection I had with it. I had lost my mom to a tragic death and was kind of a teenager looking for something to do, and thank goodness I didn't go down the wrong path. There was a lot of older people in our community, and one of them was the police chief and the fire chief that kind of took up some time with me. And so that's kind of when I got started when I was 17. And then I was hired in 1982 as one of the second dispatchers for the Verona Police Department. And so I stayed there working for them and going to college. And then in 1984, I was sent to the police academy in Jackson. Graduated there from Hines Community College, and then came back and worked there in Verona as a city police officer until 1989. In January of 1989, our police chief was killed, Bill Yent. 6 months after that, around June, I was interviewed by then Sheriff Jack Shirley, and he was the sheriff. And I remember I went to Shoney's restaurant here on North Gloucester and interviewed.
I used to wait tables there in college.
And I don't know how the interview went, but the pie was good, and I got the job, so I guess it was all good. Yeah, it was all good. But I was hired then, and I came on as a patrol deputy in 1989 with the sheriff's office. It was shortly after that Sheriff Shirley was diagnosed with cancer and died in his second term of office. And so there was a special election, and during that special election, Ray Presley, who was working there, that was a narcotics agent with the same agency, decided to run for sheriff. That's when his career started and mine continued. Sheriff Presley got elected, and I was lucky because you're at the will and pleasure of the sheriff of whoever's working, and some make it and some don't, and I made it and was very grateful and very thankful for him giving me that opportunity. And we worked together as long as he was sheriff. He actually promoted me in 1993 to the Criminal Investigation Division, where I worked felony cases for him. Helped him go through the process of building this facility with the planning of it, writing the policy and procedures for it at that time. Even came up with a program when we got ready to move over here. We moved from a 50-bed Andy Griffith turnkey jail to this modernized electronic machine that we didn't have any idea how to run, and came up with the idea of getting about 200 youth from different churches to come and spend 24 hours here the week before we opened it. Sheriff Presley was very supportive of that, helped out with it. We did that. It helped train our staff, and it also gave the youth a vision of what it would look like if you made some bad choices in life. So went through there. We moved into here. I was a criminal investigator working the night that he was killed out East Tupelo. After that, I was appointed as the interim sheriff in July of 2001. Had no intention of running, had no interest in it. My plan was I agreed to kind of ride the wave. We had a sheriff that had been killed. We had a funeral to plan. If you remember also, the big date in 2001 was 9/11. And so that was the first thing I dealt with. And so it was rocky. And then as the interim, there were two of the deputies that were there on scene that got indicted, so I had that to deal with. I had the FBI down my throat. So, that was a rough 6 or 7 months. And then his brother, Larry Presley, ran, and I did not, stayed out of it, didn't publicly get involved in any of it, hoping and thinking that I would get to go back to doing my investigative work and end my career here doing that was my plans. And so his brother Larry, who was a retired Tupelo police officer, is elected sheriff, takes office the week of Thanksgiving. One of his choices was not to retain me as being on staff. So I left in November of 2001, was very fortunate and very blessed, was unemployed about a week, and I got a call from then Mississippi Attorney General Mike Moore. His office called and offered me a position with them as an investigator with public integrity and allowed me to live here. That was really a blessing. Mm-hmm. So I did that, kind of watched General Moore in his political genre. He was very good at it. He was a good public speaker. He was good with people, kind of got interested in it. Really wanted to come back home, but I was not going through another election. That was very hurtful, and it was risky. And so staying here in contact with the people here living and working in Jackson and making some connections down there, prayed about it and thought about it and decided, you know what, the only political chance I'm going to take is go back and run, and then see how it works.
Do you mind my asking, and feel free, you can tell me, if you tell me something is off the record, it will stay
sure,
off the record.
I will.
Do you have any idea why Larry Presley did that?
Yeah, unless you hear it from Sheriff Presley,
of course.
He's the only one that knows.
Exactly.
Now, all indications are that, the two deputies that were indicted, to the Presley family, they were very loyal to Ray. They felt like whatever action they took, whether, even though they were exonerated from it and not convicted, they were indicted, they felt like that, that's what should have happened, and kind of started going down that path. And in my position as the sheriff working with the FBI, I couldn't take a side. And so when I didn't publicly come out and, just run the FBI off and lock the doors and risk everything I had, it seemed like I was working with them during this indictment. And, the presumption of it is what I believe. And then, there were some employees here that I felt like that, there were a couple that were working here that actually went to the board meeting whenever they were appointing me and asked them not to do that. There was a lot of emotions. There was a lot of hurt. It was a lot of uncertainty. To say somebody did something wrong, hey, I came out better than I could have ever imagined. You know, I think it was just a lot of pressure. I don't think Larry was personal, because me and Larry had worked together, and I knew Larry, and we're friends now. I see him, and, you know, the way it was done was not real professional, but I learned through that how to handle it when I did it. So, you know, I used things as a learning curve, but that's the best answer I can give you, and that's pure speculation on my part. It was just a very tense and difficult time for everybody involved. All of them that were involved, I worked with them, and they were friends of mine, and I still consider them friends to this day. You know, there's different things and different decisions that cause us to part ways. Some of them went on into law enforcement and have retired. One of them ran for sheriff last term in Union County, and it is what it is. But then I came back, ran for office, got elected, and I'm in my 5th term and running for my 6th.
Twisted Mayberry, Mississippi. Good old boys club, Kentucky whiskey. Backwood politics, crooked like the river. They hid the facts, now gone like a whisper. I went out of my head, I'll get it back. What makes a depraved heart act? Was it all in the King's name that made the jailbreak? How much more can these men take?
Depraved Heart Murder, The Tupelo Presleys, was written and directed by Christy McBrayer, produced, edited, mixed, and mastered by Melinda Marsalis in Sun Bear Studio. Original music by Bo Lindsey, Brad Elliott, and Christy McBrayer. Deanna Whaley, Director of Audio. Voice talent, Tom Park, Will Vance, Steve Bass, and Joyce Graddy. Thank you to all of the people who graciously participated in interviews, and a very big thank you to Charlene Presley for allowing us the rights to her story and the use of her source material. Depraved Heart Murder, The Tupelo Presleys, is a Southern Fried Chickie copyrighted work.